Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, U.S. airstrikes target Islamic militants near the Kurdish capital of Erbil.
And I'm Peggy Pico with analysis of the latest military and humanitarian action in Iraq. Plus, San Diego's politically minded gather this weekend for Politifest. We'll have the preview.
Whether it's coming from the sun or a smartphone, light is abundant, but research suggests the wrong light at the wrong time of day can disrupt the body's natural rhythms. We'll take a closer look. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. U.S. bombing against Islamic militants began Friday in northern Iraq. The military action follows President Obama's authorization last night of airstrikes to protect American military personnel from militants advancing on the Iraqi city of Erbil. David Bruns of the Associated Press brings us the latest.
I've directed our military to take targeted strikes.
Just hours after President Barack Obama addressed the nation in primetime, the Pentagon confirms U.S. aircraft have made a military strike in Iraq. Two F-18 Hornets dropped two laser-guided 500-pound bombs on an artillery piece in northern Iraq.
We are trying to prevent ISIS from getting to Erbil. Intelligence has to be key in this. You have to make sure that you have absolutely accurate understanding of where people are at every second of the day.
The militants were using the artillery to shell the northern city of Erbil, where many minorities and Christian Iraqis have fled.
We are happy, we are pleased with the airstrikes, and let them bring back our properties and let the government find a proper solution for us.
The strike comes amid concern about the militant group ISIL's growing strength in northern Iraq and a growing humanitarian crisis. The White House is focused especially on a Kurdish religious community known as the Yazidis, who fled into the mountains of northern Iraq after ISIL issued an ultimatum: convert to Islam and pay a religious tax, flee or face death.
Earlier this week, one Iraqi in the area cried to the world, "There is no one coming to help." Well, today America is coming to help.
The Pentagon says U.S. cargo planes have dropped 5,300 gallons of water and 8,000 prepackaged meals. And this video shows more aid to the Yazidis arriving Friday after two Iraqi army helicopters landed in the Sinjar Mountains and troops handed out parcels. David Bruns, The Associated Press.
Now, President Obama's authorization of airstrikes as well as humanitarian aid in Iraq represents the first military engagement since U.S. troops withdrew in 2011. Peggy Pico is taking a closer look at the situation.
Today, America is coming to help, declared President Obama in his speech last night, giving this reason for targeted U.S. airstrikes against Islamic militants in Iraq.
In recent days, these terrorists have continued to move across Iraq and have neared the city of Erbil, where American diplomats and civilians serve at our consulate and American military personnel advise Iraqi forces. To stop the advance on Erbil, I've directed our military to take targeted strikes against ISIL terrorist convoys should they move toward the city.
Here to help put the situation into context are my guests, SDSU political science professor Rick Epps and former U.S. Navy Lieutenant Barry Landendorf, National Board Director of Veterans for Peace. Welcome back.
Good to see you.
Now, Rick, this time around, the Iraqi government and Kurdish officials asked the U.S. for intervention. What else is different about these airstrikes compared to the ones 10 years ago?
Well, I think what happens here with these airstrikes, the president is really trying, at least politically and publicly, to avert and comfort the American public by saying, hey, we're not going to go any further than this. We're not putting troops on the ground. And what we're going to do is more of a humanitarian act. I think that's where he's starting. I'm concerned about whether he can end there because this is the tip of the iceberg. And in this organization, the Islamic State is much more dangerous, and I think their mission is much more complicated, which I think is going to force our policy to be modified at some point.
And let me have Barry address this. Do you think this is police action, humanitarian action, or is the U.S. actually entering into war?
Well, I certainly don't think it's a police action. What the president did last night in dropping food and water to some of the refugees of the Yazidis religious group that is trapped on this mountaintop, that's humanitarian. The threat to use airstrikes is the potential for entering into war. I mean, when you start to attack a country with the use of the military, and this is a predictable consequence of putting these U.S. troops in there a few months ago. And Veterans for Peace said that's the danger. If you put them into this country and you need to go in and protect them, the first alternative is to use airstrikes. Now, there's some consequences of that. Number one, we don't want to appear to be taking sides in a sectarian civil war, right? So the United States has to avoid that. The other thing is that the ISIS group, the military, is indistinguishable from the civilian population, the way they dress. They're not distinguished. They don't wear uniforms. They don't have any military insignia. So you have a high risk of civilian casualties, which only further will alienate the United States in the Middle East by killing civilians. So there's some alternative things that we ought to be looking at.
And we'll get to that in just a moment. But Rick, I want to ask you, Congress is in recess until September 8th. What's the likelihood that they'll actually come back to cope with this, to make a declaration of war?
I think it depends on what happens on the ground. I think as this situation evolves, we're going to see what actually will, how far they'll have to go. Right now, they're not bringing them back. I think we're at the tip of the iceberg. I think we're at, this is a very dangerous point that we're at right now, because as you say, we've got people on the ground, and in some ways politically, if you're trying to be able to deal with the situation so the American people could sort of synthesize it, there's a rationale for having those people there, because then if anybody is attacked, you have to justify being able to go in and protect them. The American people don't want a war, but the reality of we also can't afford the spread of this extremist Islamic group in that region with access to a vast amount of oil in that north region. It's a real problem. We have a real problem here.
Let's talk about the humanitarian effort for a moment. Obama also authorized American planes to drop food, water, and medical supplies to about 40,000 Yazidi people, many of whom are said to be dying from starvation and illness. After they fled the mountains near Mosul to escape Islamic State militants, they were formerly called ISIS militants. Let's hear what Obama said.
In recent days, Yazidi women, men, and children from the area of Sinjar have fled for their lives. And thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, are now hiding high up on the mountain with little but the clothes on their backs. They're without food, they're without water, people are starving, and children are dying of thirst. Meanwhile, ISIL forces below have called for the systematic destruction of the entire Yazidi people, which would constitute genocide.
Now, genocide. My question to both of you, and I'll start with you. Does humanitarian aid include military action against terrorists that are engaging in genocide?
Yes, it can. And this is the slippery slope, though, because it is a humanitarian action because you're trying to protect those people. However, in order to protect them, you've got to engage the militants, Islamic militants, and that becomes a real problem. And that's where the process of war and the potential escalation comes in.
And Barry, would you agree with that?
I do agree with it. I think one of the things that we ought to be considering, what the United States ought to be leading an effort to, is to get the United Nations involved. We need the United Nations involved in a major humanitarian effort. And one of those efforts should be to evacuate these people out of the country, as many as we can. Congress and some of the local San Diego Congress people have already called for giving visas to some of the people in the Christian minorities in Iraq. They're hunkered down in Erbil. And so there are things that we can do in addition to the action of the airstrikes that the president has called for. And I think that's it. And I think you mentioned about Congress leaving. A few weeks ago, Congress passed House Resolution 105, and that specifically said that the president cannot take any military action at all in Iraq unless Congress authorizes that. Well, the president has sidestepped that resolution, and I haven't heard one congressman come out and say anything about that. They've jumped on board the presidential bandwagon, and so this resolution that they so religiously passed with the support, and they know the American people don't want to go back into Iraq. That's why that resolution passed, and so they've simply ignored that.
All right, we are out of time, so there's a lot more about this on our website, kpbs.org. Lieutenant Barry Landendorf and political science professor Rick Epps, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
As expected, Mayor Kevin Faulconer vetoed the recently approved minimum wage ordinance, with San Diego's small business owners standing behind him. Faulconer says they're the ones who would suffer.
They may have to lay some people off. They may have to raise prices. They may even decide that running a business in San Diego is just too expensive.
Immediately following the announcement, Council President Todd Gloria says the council would consider an override vote within 30 days. It takes 6 votes to override a mayoral veto, the same number that actually approved the increase in the first place. If the override passes, the city's hourly minimum wage would increase to $9.75 in January, $10.50 in 2016, and $11.50 in 2017. By the way, Chamber of Commerce says it's prepared to fight the measure if the council is successful. An ex-con accused of fueling a fire in Oceanside during May's wildfires will be back in court next week. Alberto Serrato is hoping to get an arson charge thrown out to avoid a retrial after a judge declared a mistrial in the case. Serrato is facing a 13-year prison term. Californians are among the biggest spenders in the nation on housing. A new Commerce Department report finds residents here in the Golden State spent more than, on average, $8,600 on housing and utilities in 2012. That ranks us in about 6th in the nation, but despite all the miles we rack up on the roads, California ranks near the bottom for spending on gas and other energy products. The Imperial Irrigation District will pay $12 million for its role in the 2011 blackout in San Diego and other parts of Southwest. UT San Diego says some of the money will go to the federal government and the rest will be spent on improvements to the electrical grid. It is the second settlement with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Imagine being a San Diego Padre for a day. That's exactly what a group of military children got to experience at Petco Park.
1, 2. Whoa.
Joe Rivera loves hitting the baseball.
Because you just get to smack the ball and then see their faces when you get a home run.
Rivera already has 8 home runs under his belt, and he's only 8 years old. Of course, he wants to be a San Diego Padre when he grows up, maybe a catcher or third baseman. Rivera is one of 36 kids from military families invited to this private baseball clinic, sponsored by Bank of America and organized by the USO, where both boys and girls ages 7 to 12 take turns pitching, fielding, base running, and batting, just like the big leaguers. Judy Forrester with the USO says all the kids were chosen by participating in an essay contest.
We got this precious essay back from a little girl who goes, you know, I'm not a really big Padre fan, but my dad is a huge baseball fan and the Padres are his favorite team and he's deployed. So I really would like to be a Padre for a day and send him pictures of me in a Padre suit on the field with the Padres so that he knows that I'm supporting him here at home.
It's truly a unique opportunity for these kids with plenty of chances to be seen on the stadium big screen and learn from former players like Damian Jackson.
All I want to talk to you about is some of the basic fundamentals, okay?
As for our young slugger, Joe Rivera, his father is getting ready to deploy to Bahrain, and he says he'll miss him, but he won't ever forget this opportunity.
I feel happy that I'm here because I really am getting bored of sitting in seats. I'm right now on the field. But also I like watching the Padres.
Someday we may be watching him on the field of dreams.
That story was produced with help from videographer Christopher Maui. By the way, the children also got a behind-the-scenes tour of Petco Park. The Encinitas Little League All-Star team is headed home today after losing a semifinal game 5-1 against Mountain Ridge Little League from Las Vegas. Encinitas also lost to the same team on Wednesday. Mountain Ridge, by the way, will face the winner of today's other semifinal in the tournament championship tomorrow. Then the winner of that game advances to the Little League World Series. We've often heard that, a proper diet, exercise, and sleep can actually improve our health, but research suggests we might want to consider something else, something so ubiquitous few of us ever stop to reflect on it. That would be light. KPBS science reporter David Wagner tells us why getting light in the right amount at the right time is so important.
Sachin Panda feels right at home at the Salk Institute. not just because of the prestige, but also because of Salk's unique architecture.
They built this institute with big glass doors and windows.
At every turn, the building emphasizes one of Panda's abiding interests, light. His lab sits 2 stories below ground floor, so you might think it would be dark and gloomy, but thanks to Salk's deep natural light wells, it's anything but.
There is very little lab space inside that's actually not brightly illuminated during daytime.
Here, Panda studies circadian rhythms. He's trying to understand how an internal biological clock keeps our bodies on a steady 24-hour cycle. And he's found that light plays a crucial role, but not necessarily through vision. Even blind people have their daily rhythms regulated by light.
That told us that there must be some unknown light sensor present in the eye.
That light sensor is called melanopsin. Panda knows that it helps to keep the body's internal clock ticking because he once did an experiment on mice that lacked melanopsin. They could see just fine, but when Panda simulated jet lag for the mice by adjusting the time of day when they were exposed to light, things got rough.
A normal mouse would readjust to the new day-night cycle within a week, and then this mouse would take almost a month to adjust. And that was really fascinating because this mouse can see perfectly fine what is around it, but the light sensor that was resetting its clock was not there.
Without melanopsin, the body struggles to intuitively know when it's time to wake up and when it's time to go to sleep. That's because melanopsin helps to regulate a hormone called melatonin. It's sometimes referred to as the hormone of darkness.
And there have been numerous studies showing melatonin improves sleep.
High melatonin levels make us drowsy, so ideally we want less of it during the day. That's where light comes in. When light floods the melanopsin in our eyes, our body dials back on melatonin, keeping us alert. At least, that's how things should work. But the way Panda sees it, this system is getting hijacked by the typical 21st century lifestyle.
Nowadays, with artificial light and with so much work to do, we constantly stay awake late into the night.
We spend all day working indoors, shielded from natural light. Then we spend our nights bombarding ourselves with bright displays from TVs and laptops and smartphones.
Type was frequently given away.
There's actually reason to think we could be harming our health with all these wrong light signals at all the wrong times. Just look at the medical data on graveyard shift workers who live totally out of sync with the natural light cycle.
What has been shown is shift work predisposes to quite a few chronic diseases like obesity, diabetes, certain kind of cancers, and even dementia.
But Panda says more data is needed to really drill down on the way light affects health. So he's getting people to wear light sensors around their wrists.
So this device will monitor your activity, and it also has a light sensor.
The idea of a Fitbit for light intrigued me, so I took one of Panda's sensors home.
So the whole idea is to see how much light you get exposed to during the entire day, and we'll see whether that light level will affect how you are sleeping, how much you are active, etc.
And so I went about my routine, working, sleeping, running errands. Ten days later, I went back to Panda's lab to get the rundown on my light diet.
Let's look at your data.
Panda boots up a graph with bright yellow bars tracking my daily light exposure. The first thing I notice, I get very faint light when I'm in the office. A few yellow peaks mark my commute into and from work, but my chart is mostly dim, poorly lit valleys. There was one outlier though, a day when I worked mostly outside.
You look at this day and look at the sleep that night. There is very little hand movement in bed, so that means you were sleeping like a baby.
Panda says little by little, people are becoming more conscious about the link between light and health.
Light therapy mimics outdoor light.
Some people now use light therapy to treat their depression. And developers are making software that filters out bright light from laptop displays at night to help the body's melatonin production. Panda says buildings should be targeted next. He'd like to see architects fill offices and other buildings with better light.
People who are building these structures, are they factoring in what we are now learning from the effect of light on behavior, human behavior and health.
If you can't bring workers outdoors, Ponda says maybe we can figure out a way to bring the outdoors into the workers. David Wagner, KPBS News.
Video journalist Katie Shulov helped produce that story. 3 Chinese Navy ships are visiting San Diego. It follows their debut in the world's largest maritime military training exercise. It's called the Rim of the Pacific, or RIMPAC for short. Over 22 nations, 49 ships, and 200 aircraft are participating, as well as 25,000 service members. At the same time, the Chinese are at Naval Base San Diego. The USS Blue Ridge is being received in China. It's all part of what the Navy calls a reciprocal port visit. While this isn't the first time the Chinese Navy has visited San Diego, it's still a rare occurrence.
I'm Mark Sauer. The SDPD's camera program is out of focus. The convention center expansion may be doomed, and funding cuts create huge backlogs in San Diego courts. Find out what's up on the roundtable tonight at 8:30.
Voice of San Diego's 2014 Politifest is set for this weekend. Peggy Pico has a preview.
Politifest features community booths, activities, and conversations about San Diego's future. This year's theme is Live, Work, Learn. Joining us with details is Voice of San Diego's Scott Lewis. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Peggy.
Now, Scott, last year's Politifest focused on basically how to move forward after Mayor Fieldner's sexual harassment scandal. Tell us more about the theme this year.
Well, we try to capture what we think people and what we've studied and what we think they care about and what they're talking about. And it seems pretty clear that it's about jobs, it's about quality jobs, minimum wage, things like that. It's about quality schools, about all the controversies and reforms and charters and other things going on in schools. And it's about housing. It's about finding the housing that we need. And so, yeah, we're going to have, everybody always talks about civic engagement, but this is a chance to come and listen to serious discussions while also getting a beer or letting your kids play at the Kid Zone or see the fire truck and other things. We want to really we want to bring politics, public affairs to the people in a way that's approachable and something that they can, again, bring their kids to. You're not going to take your kids to a hotel banquet hall, and get your ticket
City
validated.
Hall meeting for all day.
Right. So, take them to a place where they can play and joust or whatever and have fun.
Yeah, I've been a couple of times, and there's something for everybody on every single level. You have some special guests this time. Yeah. Why did you feel it was important to include Neil Kashkari?
Well, I wanted to have a governor's debate, but those are forces bigger than mine. So I invited both the governor and Neil Kashkari to come down. Neil was the only one that accepted it. I want to hear. He's an interesting guy. He's pulling stunts around the state. He's well-spoken, has a lot of thoughts, and he's trying to transform the image of the Republican Party. So I'm going to let him talk for a minute, and then I'm going to ask him some tough questions about, he did all this work, was wealthy. How did he end up homeless? But he talk about, what's with the stunt, kinds of stuff like that. So.
In these discussions and with the speakers, will people in the audience be able to ask questions?
Yeah, hopefully we'll allow for people to text in questions. We've been having good success with that, so that they can funnel to my phone, and then and we can see how they react. So then Speaker Tony Atkins, Assembly Speaker Tony Atkins, is going to come up. A lot of controversial issues about where we get our energy. Is it clean enough? Is there other options? What about the big Vergara ruling about teacher tenure and other things? Is she going to run for mayor? I think there's a lot of great questions.
Be exciting to hear. Now, this idea tournament, this is part of it. What's that all about?
Well, so we years ago I came up with this idea that we could come up with like an American Idol for ideas, right? And have people actually vote on people coming up with thoughts. And it's morphed a little bit into people actually submitting, and now there's prize money, grant money for nonprofit or community groups that come up with best ideas. So we have 5 finalists that our members at Voice San Diego have voted on, and now those 5 finalists will face the judges and the crowd and see how they do. So my only goal is to not lose my voice. So.
We'll try to help you with that.
Right.
Can you tell us a few of the ideas, or do we have to be surprised?
Why don't you come check them out? I'm not going to do them justice here, but go to Politifest. It's also it starts at 10. Neil Kashkari coming up, and then Tony Atkins after that. So.
Now, why do you think people? You talked about civic responsibility and civic engagement. Yeah. Why should they attend? I mean, what ultimately do you want them to take away from this experience?
Well, I want not only the people that can come in and just confront people like the Water Authority or Assemblywoman who's going to have a booth, or other people. They can talk to them and get ideas. But then also those people can interact with each other. You know, how many times can various civic groups that care about important things that are very different from each other, how many times can they interact? And then it's all about politics. Politics isn't a distraction, or it's always this thing you're not supposed to talk about. And this is a place to talk about it, to really get in, and to show the world that we can have these discussions in a fun and exciting setting. And again, there's beer and there's shade at the beer garden this year finally.
There's shade and all sorts.
So again, it should be an approachable type place for these kind of fun but very important discussions.
Sort of a picnic for politics.
Exactly,
That's what it seems like. All right, Voice of San Diego, Scott Lewis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I want to let folks know that Voice of San Diego's Politifest 2014 is this Saturday, August 9th at Liberty Station Central Promenade. It goes from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and KPBS is a Politifest sponsor.
I'm Judy Woodruff. My conversation with the president of Somalia, where al-Shabaab Islamic militants recently have stepped up their terrorist attacks. That's Friday on the PBS NewsHour.
Let's check out the weekend forecast now. There's a chance of minor flooding in the beach areas through Monday due to high surf and strong rip currents. Temperatures mostly in the mid-70s. A mix of sun and clouds for the inland valleys. Temperatures in the low 80s. As for the mountains, clear, sunny. Temperatures in the low 80s, like the inland valleys. Deserts, sunny, well above 100 right into Monday. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend.